And welcome back to Frankly Speaking. I'm your host, Frank. Let's call this volume 13 of the Integralist Chronicles. So, on the last cast I did on this series, I talked about the disaster the George W. Bush administration was for the Republican Party and the conservative movement. And I want to continue on that because there's some really critical points to hit on there. And the first of which is the despair in which the Conservative Party found itself in after the election. Now, to what degree conservatives are willing to admit this, I don't know. At this point, I don't call myself a conservative anymore. I was at the time. And I can tell you, right, whenever a talking point hits talk radio, especially with the big talkers of big ink on the right, well, that's telling you that the message is getting out. And by the time George W. Bush left the presidency, again, effectively handing it to Barack Obama after 8 years of getting nothing done, and you could argue that the country went even further to the left with things like No Child Left Behind and a bunch of other issues, you began to see a frustration on the right and a bewilderment because, again, remember what Rush, right? Or Rushbo, the king of the EIB Golden Mike used to say, is that at some point, all these liberal policies have to be reversed in government because these policies all grow on top of each other within the realm of the bureaucracy. And when George W. Bush was elected, this was a chance, right, to roll them back because it was the first time in 48, 50 years that the Republicans not only control the Senate, but also control the House. I believe that was in 2002, if memory serves me correct. And the Republicans in 2002 had the power to begin to roll back the monstrosity that government was becoming at that period in history. But effectively, nothing happened. The gravy train of big government continued to roll along with a Republican in charge. That's why by the time George W. Bush leaves, and ironically enough, he left the nation again in a financial crisis like his daddy did to a certain degree, right? 3 months before the 2008 election, we get the great financial collapse of 2008, effectively handing the election to Barack Obama and what would be another 8 disastrous years under a radical. But remember what happened after 2008. Conservatives were stunned, right? Nothing conservative really was passed. Government wasn't rolled back, right? And you had an Iraqi war that had everybody just bewildered to such a degree that even the administration itself by 2007, 2008 wasn't even defending its position anymore, saying, well, we can't win against the media, so we're not even going to defend the Iraq war anymore, right? But the country was so weary of George W. Bush and to be honest with you, a screeching media 24-hour news cycle that had everybody absolutely exhausted by the end of 8 years of George W. Bush, that it was Rush that actually came out and started saying to the Republican Party base, okay, folks, calm down. Now's not the time to panic. I'll let you know when it's time to panic. Now, he doesn't start saying this until we get into the Barack Obama years, because what we figured out on the right was 8 disastrous years on the heel of 8 disastrous years of Bill Clinton and 4 more do-nothing years of George H.W. Bush. The problem is we have 2 decades rolling by and nothing is being rolled back. And this gravy train is going to the far left in America, right? You wonder how we ended up here in America today with all these divisions and the MAGA Trump movement that's, well, call it whatever it is that you want to call it at this point. But it's not traditional conservatism or republicanism at this point. It's kind of pick your flavor is what it is. Pick your poison now. But it was Rush that understood that the Republican Party was in trouble. The conservative movement was completely demoralized after George W. Bush. And it was the talkers on the right, starting with Rush himself, saying, calm down, folks. Now's not the time to panic. I'm El Rushbo. Behind the EIB mic, I will let you know when it's time to panic. This was a way for the right, at least big conservative ink on talk radio waves, to calm everybody down. Because really, when you come off 8 years of doing nothing with George W. Bush, and then a radical like Barack Obama who comes in and revolutionizes the healthcare industry right away and foments a lot of the racial divisions that we were already struggling from in the first place. America was a very dark place in those times at that period in history, followed by, of course, the Obergefell decision, which legalized gay marriage, right? Things were going radically to the left in that period. And the conservative movement was starting to see, wait a minute, we have problems here. Who's on our side? Who actually fights for us? And that's where the uniparty thing, I started to see it. Right around 2011, 2012, 2013, I said, wait a minute, these guys are all in bed together at the end of the day, because there's no substantial movement in overturning any of these liberal policies, whether they're economics or whether they're cultural, or whether they're foreign policy, whatever it may be. But again, it's a two-party system. What do? Vote for the far lefties, vote for the communists, vote for the socialists. We all continue to go to the polls and hope and pray that finally the Republican Party has the courage to do something conservative in America. And the desperation was real on the right. And what was fascinating was, with the George W. Bush administration, and typical of the Republican Party, they always paid lip service to the conservative base, even though they had disdain for the conservative base. They hated the conservative base, especially the real conservatives on the right. And so you would see a thing like, well, they will uphold, for example, on moral issues, a moral policy as long as it was feasible at the polls, right? Remember, this was a time before the Obergefell decision, before gay marriage had surpassed sort of the population opinion poll, where now a majority of opinion favor gays getting married. Back in those days, 2004, let's remember, the poll numbers were still 60-40, maybe even 65-35 against gay marriage. And the irony of it all is George W. Bush in 2004, again, using lip service on abortion and not actually doing anything for Christians, but also using Christians again with the gay marriage issue. He ran on a campaign. Well, I don't want to say he ran a campaign, but part of the strategy of the Republican Party to get George W. Bush across the finish line was to run propositions in 10 battleground states, or I don't know if they were all battlegrounds, but quite a few of them were. But these battleground states, propositions that would ban gay marriage. Now, why would they do that? Well, quite simple. You got a country at the time in 2004, right, that is still anti-gay marriage. You put them on these bellwether or these battleground states, and you get the Christian vote out. Again, the Republican Party using Christians for their prostitutional reasons, if you want to call it that, right? And ironically enough, it was that Christian vote at the state level that got George W. Bush across the finish line in 2004 in the midst of a war in Iraq that was already going bad and looked bad. And it was almost undefensible with a 24-hour news cycle that bombarded the issue every day. And as typical with the Republican Party, they use Christians and well-meaning Americans, their good intentions, against them, while never really intending to do anything about it. Because effectively, it's not like they solve the issue of the rise of the gay marriage issue. They just prostituted it at a state level where they could benefit and never had to take the stand on it, right? Just like with abortion, they never drew a fine line in the sand. They never did anything other than the Mexico policy that's immediately reversed whenever a Democrat comes into power. No. We give symbolic gestures. We give lip service to the conservative movement and to the Christian base because we need their votes to get across the finish line. And 2004 was a classic example of that. And this is where talk radio on the right, well, it began to see some of these problems. Now, they were not going to let you in on the little secret that they saw. You would see little snippets of it, little indications of it, like with Rush, telling people to calm down. Now's not the time to abandon the party. Now's not the time to panic, right? I'll let you know when it's time to panic in America. And so, but also understanding what Rush had stipulated for years, that if these liberal policies aren't reversed at some times, that there's going to come a point where they're so big and intrusive, so entrenched in government, they won't ever be able to be abolished. And again, we're coming off 8 years of Bill Clinton, a radical leftist and a moral degenerate, 8 years of George Bush, who did nothing, and now we get 8 more years of Barack Obama. Can you see why the Republican Party base and conservatives were dispirited, and why many people began to question this thing? Because there's no counterbalance to the leftist liberal agenda. It's all a facade at the end of the day. Now, for the right, they may not intend it for it to be a facade, but it plays out that way, because with conservatives, and this is the big problem on the right, and I keep telling you guys, they're stuck in the ideological framework of how things should be, how the nation should be governed. These are the ideological principles we stand for. But what conservatives have never learned how to do is actually how to govern, right? This is why I find it interesting, the very trap, for example, that conservatives always set themselves up with. And let me give you an example of this, right? Glenn Beck always pulls this one, right? He will always tell you, well, when we're in power, we can't take away the bad freedoms, those bad things, right? Like, I don't know, pornography or whatever it may be. That's one example. Or abortion. We can't forcefully take those away, because when the bad guys get in power, they're going to take our good freedoms away. And this is a trap that the right is always caught up in between. The argument between individual rights and the common good, right? And they can't intermix the two. So we wind up in a society in America between the left and the right that is really two extremes: all individual rights and all common good. One is capitalism, the other one is communism. And there's no common sense in the middle, and there's no ability to move in between in the middle. And the problem is because there's no moral authority in America. There is no church in America. And so not at the state level, not at the national level. And so when it comes to rectifying more digressions, I guess you could say, both sides have to take their most extreme positions in order to protect themselves, right? And so when we get to a point in society where you believe, let's say abortion, right? Abortion, which is very interesting to me, because when you say, okay, if we ban it at the federal level, we'd like to, but when the other side gets in power, they may put it back and make it even worse. And maybe they'll start chopping off heads, or whatever it is the argument is. At the end of the day, there should be a basic philosophical understanding of natural law. Abortion should be outlawed because it's wrong. It's an inherent evil. It should not be subjugated to the whims of democracy. But then again, if you have no moral authority, who is there to declare what is naturally right and naturally wrong? And so there's this extreme trap, a balance and counterbalance of sort, or lack of counterbalance of sorts, that weighs the good from the bad. So each side has to take extreme positions, which for the right is disastrous, right? Because as you allow something like pornography to run rampant throughout civilization, poisoning the hearts and minds of young men and also young women, you create an absolute degenerate culture that always gravitates to the left. Ironically enough, they empower the very liberals they are fighting, supposedly, because they can't control their freedoms. These issues of freedoms that are absolutely have been taken out of control at this point in history, right? And again, it's that balance between freedom and the common good. We can't find the middle ground on this, because there is no moral arbiter of truth, and it's up to the whims of democracy. The individuals going to the poll, which I've always told you guys, right? That one of the strangest things about America, to me, and really all of the liberal West, is how we vote on moral issues. Where in the old world, it stayed much more morally sound because, well, the church decided moral issues, right? This is why historian Charles Columbus said, when we talk about the supposed tyranny of the monarchs, tyranny of the monarchs, he says, well, there was no king in the old world that had the power to ever change the definition of marriage. couldn't do that. I mean, not only could a president do that in America, but we have governors at the state level doing that, right? And maybe that's where it belongs when we talk about subsidiarity. But again, we're so far gone from subsidiarity in the modern West that we don't know how to govern anymore, right? Right? I'll go back to, Timothy Gordon makes the argument that America being founded as a crypto-Catholic republic, preaching and harping on the notion of subsidiarity. And listen, in its most strictest ideological sense, I agree with Timothy Gordon. Subsidiarity should be the standard. But what happens when we deviate from the status quo? When we have the infiltration of governance and democracy that ruins the fabric of subsidiarity, how do we maneuver then, right? Mr. Timothy Gordon would argue, well, everything worked fine in America, perfect crypto-Catholic republic. First Amendment was Catholic, Second Amendment, it's all Catholic until we get to the 14th Amendment. Right after the Civil War, 1868, 14th Amendment, it abolished the state churches, equal rights, it ruined everything. So now he says the whole thing is done, move to a red state, let's all wait for the collapse. Oh, okay, fine, Tim, I get what you're saying. That we have problems. 14th Amendment has been disastrous. But my question is, why was the poison pill put into the Constitution then? Right? And what is the metric in which we justify or correct this problem, right? Because I don't think the church is going to tell us, hey, give up, let the whole thing collapse. No, the church has a job to still govern, protect its flock, and it's going to care about its flock in the real world. And how we're going to deal with this, right? Yes, we're talking about Pope Pius IX during the Italian reunification, where he's writing about subsidiarity. Well, of course he is. Garibaldi's coming up to the southern part of Italy, starts in Sicily. He started in my father's hometown of Marsala. That's where he landed. I've seen when I was a kid, a long time ago, the La Porta di Garibaldi, right? The door of Garibaldi, where he entered in there to usher in sort of a lot of what people say is a Freemasonic influence and instills his own monarchy, robbing the Catholic Church of the papal lands. And what the church itself and what the popes of the past has said was enshrining or entrapping the Pope as sort of as a prisoner within the Vatican. Well, of course, Pope Pius IX is going to write about subsidiarity. He's losing his land. And even if you argue, well, that's the dictate, that's the standard of the church. But what happens the moment subsidiarity is conquered by a nefarious force? How do you govern then, right? Because by the time we get to Pope Pius XI, what does Pope Pius XI do? It cuts a deal with Mussolini. And listen, Mussolini had aspects of subsidiarity without a doubt. It was not a collectivist system, but it did have its command elements to the economy. And Pope Pius XI went along with that. So much so that he awarded, Mussolini the highest award in 1931, I believe, that a civilian could ever get by the Catholic Church. What is it? The Scepter of the Holy Cross, I believe is what it is, calling Mussolini a man sent by divine providence. So how does a man that in the Lateran Accords pushes and gets Pope Pius XI to agree to the Lateran Accords, which effectively made Italy a nation state, a big nation, right? Foregoing the past providential structure of Italy, now we have Italy as a nation. Well, was that a violation of subsidiarity? Or was Pope Pius XI simply being malleable, understanding the circumstances? Again, I agree with the ideal, but like conservatives, I think Mr. Timothy Gordon has a problem of governance, doesn't know how to govern. Conservatives don't know how to govern. They've never known how to govern. And when something falls outside the realm of governance, and there's a complexity to the philosophical principle, we're all stuck screaming and chanting about the founding princes of America, the founding fathers, the greatest men in the history of the world. Oh, well, wait a minute. You have to find a way to govern. And so, that's why I say, Mr. Timothy Gordon, he seems like a good Catholic to me. I respect him, don't get me wrong. I have a fundamental disagreement here with him. But when Timothy Gordon says to me, hey, well, 14th Amendment, it's over. Let's all move to a red state because it's all going to collapse. And I have heard him say that. Well, okay, is that the position the church takes? Is the church saying let's give up? I don't think so. You got to find a way to deal with this thing now, right? And so what do you do with something like what happened in Ohio a few months back, where a red state, the essence of subsidiarity, said, you know what? We're going to shrine abortion at a state level in our Constitution. Boom, booyah, that's subsidiarity. They decided, right? So abortion is legal. Well, I don't know. I think the church would say, well, if there's a higher authority in place, shouldn't that higher authority be able to step in when there's great violations of the moral law? Listen, I'm not a canon lawyer. I'm not. But it seems like common sense to me, right? If you're going to stick to this pure idealism of subsidiarity, fine. But don't tell me that you believe in subsidiarity and it's all collapsed now. We're still trying to govern. We have to deal with this every day as human beings, regardless if the ideological principles are being fulfilled to the proper scope or not. We still have to govern. And so this is what Pope Pius XI figured out in Italy at the time, and this is what we're dealing with today. How do we deal with this mess today? And this is what even conservatives in this country don't know how to deal with, right? Because it's an appeal to ideology. So we get to the Barack Obama term. The political right is depressed. Listen, I think a lot of people at the time, after the 8 disastrous years of George W. Bush, because the racial card was played hard on the part of the left during that election, making, hey, listen, the first black president, right, appealing to the teenage college campus, teeny bopper culture. Hey, let's absolve ourselves from the racial past of America by voting for the first black president. And it worked to a certain degree, right? It worked. And I think part of it was the economic decline that happened at the end of George W. Bush era. Part of it was this racially charged campaign strategy by the political left. And I think a lot of people told themselves, I know I did, well, listen, circumstances, timing was bad. Barack Obama won. We got a radical leftist in. And even in 2008, I was telling myself, listen, the American people are going to wake up. Come on, Ronald Reagan always said that when push comes to shove, I'm paraphrasing here, when push comes to shove, the American people would always make the right choice. And that's what I told myself after 2008. And a lot of people told themselves after 2008. Because no way was Barack Obama a closet Marxist who used racialism and effectively governed over an economy that was stagnant for 8 years. I think averaged what, 1% GDP? 1.1, 1.2? Nothing. It was nothing. It was stagnant, right? We told ourselves, the American people in 2012 are going to wake up. They're not going to reelect a closet Marxist, and we're going to put America back on track. We're going to bring back conservative values, cut government, cut taxes, right? Get the moral agenda straightened out. In 2012, and guess what? Barack Obama was reelected. The American people had decided that a far leftist radical president, that's okay. And it was at that moment that I started to realize to myself, because I started studying history around 2012, 2013 was when I left the party. The election of Barack Obama put me over the top in regards to party politics and the facade that it really was. And then you go through the history of America, or I did, and you realize that America, well, it has a history of electing radical presidents. Let's be honest here. Was a Barack Obama anomaly, or was it the norm? Now that I look at it, it was the norm. Think about it. You got a moral degenerate in Bill Clinton. The peanut farmer was a complete waste of time, right? FDR, flaming radical leftist who sided with Joseph Stalin, had Soviet spies in the White House with him. Woodrow Wilson, another dubious character, and I'll put it very nicely there. Another far radical leftist. People have questions about Abraham Lincoln. The point is that America has always elected radical presidents. It's nothing new. We just have to be honest with ourselves. And we're not willing to do that because, especially on the conservative side, who believe that in this democracy thing, that at the end of the day, the American people will make the right choice. And that if, as long as we fight in the battle arena of ideas, changing hearts and minds, we're going to take back America, baby. Yeah. And the fact is, if we're being honest, America's gone to the far left since its founding. Listen, you can sit here and tell me that it all worked perfectly fine until the 14th Amendment, right after the Civil War, 1868. But come on, let's be honest here. The Protestants were already fracturing all over the place in America with their cults popping up out of thin air. How long was that going to last, right? You said, well, we had state churches until the 14th Amendment. Okay, so what state church? Let's say we don't have 14th Amendment. What Protestant state church will still be dominant today under the dictates of religious liberty, right? How Americans took it to create and concoct any religion or idea that I want. It's not a coincidence that the Mormons pop up in the 1830s right away. What, one generation after the enshrinement of the Constitution, right? And this radical shift from Jehovah's Witnesses to the campfire preachers to the Scientologists. And eventually now we got a whole new strand of Pentecostalism and evangelicals that have now taken over the current status quo in Protestant America, right? Were the state churches, the Protestant state churches, were they going to hold in America anyways without a 14th Amendment? I don't know. I don't know if they were going to hold, especially with the winds of liberalism pointing and spreading throughout the world. If you believe that the 14th Amendment is the sort of the line of demarcation to defend liberalism in having some common sense and actual functionality within governance, if that, well, fine. Then go look at the Europeans and what they were dealing with, right? Because like I said in that last cast, the Europeans had to deal with communism and socialism 75 to 100 years before Americans really had to deal with it in a real and meaningful way. And look at how the Europeans dealt with it. They had to deal with it with fascism. We're in that same spot now. We're in that same timeline, 75 to 100 years later, and we're dealing with it in a global economy, in a post-industrial world where communism now through mass transit, mass communications has infiltrated every institution. And how do we solve this problem now? Right? Let's go vote harder next time, because that's what the right keeps telling itself. The fact is, the Europeans knew what was going on a long time ago, and they had to deal with it over there. Whether that reaction was right or wrong, we can debate that. But the moment you hear conservatives say, we're going to fight in the battle arena of ideas, they might as well just say, listen, we're just going to allow the communists to win a little bit slower, okay? Rather than hand it to the Democrats who are bringing communism, destroy the economy and the nation within 20 years, we'll give you 100 years to get your affairs in order before we allow the communists to win. Because conservatives have never known how to govern, and they've never known how to fight back other than screeching on talk radio airwaves. That's all they've ever done, with great monetary incentive, of course, for those individuals involved in that industry, right? Conservative big ink is what it is, right? See, this has all been a facade for so long. Liberalism has been destined to govern the world since the French Revolution. It's infected every segment of the world, every segment of our society, every institution, and we believe we can manage it rather than fighting back against it. And we've never fought back against it. And the moment you had a few individuals in Europe that did try to fight against it, where did the classical liberals side with? Who did they side with? The communists. The communists, right? With communist spies right in the FDR administration. This is so frustrating to go through this. And simply to see big conservative Inc. repeat the same talking points that they were saying 40 years ago, and the country is now only more radically to the left. Nothing has changed. Nothing has got better. Nothing has been reversed. There's nothing conservative about America. The faith has been wiped out. The culture's a flaming pile of manure, and the family has been destroyed. And yet we're doing the same left and right talking points in America today in our political discourse. Tell me how this is not all a waste of time. Tell me, when do we get serious, guys? I don't know. But the George W. Bush administration unveiled the facade, which was not only the Republican Party, but the conservative movement as a bunch of fraudsters. They can't save America. Conservatism is a dead ideology that always winds up supporting the communist cause at the end of the day. And that's the biggest Achilles heel that they have. They can't save America. It's why we're on a straight trajectory to the far left. And none of this is solvable, not the way we're dealing with it today, right? Because what we have to first and foremost, is deal with the moral law. But we won't do that because we have a society post-sexual revolution where we all like our sins under our belt, right? Sins under the belt, right? Under the guise of freedom and liberty. Nobody can tell me those are sins, right? This is what's happened in the post-Catholic West. It's all been morally degenerate ever since. It's all morally collapsed. And now we're trying to use the machinations of this false idea of Judeo-Christian values, which was nothing. It was garbage made up post-World War II, by the way. It's all a facade and a lie to continue the machine of conservative ink on the right, all the while the communists have taken over the entire effing globe at this point in history. I want to thank you for joining me, ladies and gentlemen. Whew. Whoa, I was on a roll on this one. Got to take a breath here, guys. Volume 13 of the Integralist Chronicles. I'll do another one of these soon. I got a lot to say. I've been through a lot politically in my life. I've seen a lot of things culturally, and I'll share those things with you. I want to thank you for joining me again. This is Frank signing off for Frankly Speaking. Good night, everybody.